7 years ago, I married Josh Martin. Everyone thought it was a fairy tale. The handsome, successful businessman and me, the woman who'd fallen hopelessly in love with him. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. Josh didn't love me. He didn't even like me. Our marriage was forced, a strategic move dictated by his parents and mine. They saw it as the perfect solution to both families' businesses struggling. Josh, though, didn't hide his resentment. He believed I was responsible for the death of his first love, Brooklyn James, and he made sure I knew it every day. Outwardly, we were the perfect couple. At family gatherings, friends' parties, or company events, Josh would hold my hand, flash his charming smile, and people would envy us. But behind closed doors, things were cold. He wouldn't touch me, wouldn't speak to me unless he had to. When we were alone, his silence was a constant reminder of how much he hated me. He blamed me for Brooklyn's death. She was the woman he had once loved with all his heart. Her tragic end haunted him, and for some reason, he believed I had a hand in it. No matter how much I tried to explain, no matter how many times I told him that I had nothing to do with her death, he didn't care. The guilt and hatred he felt were far too deep. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. I tried everything. I tried to love him. I tried to make him see me as more than a business partner, but it was all futile. His heart, mind, and soul were consumed by Brooklyn, and I was the one he blamed for her death. But then came that fateful day, the day Brooklyn came back, alive. It happened out of nowhere. My life had been a routine of daily arguments, bitter silence, and fighting for scraps of love from a man who never saw me as anything more than a business transaction. I'd thought I was finally breaking free of the emotional chains, but that morning, the phone call changed everything. Brooklyn was alive. She had never died. She had faked her own death to escape a dark, twisted past that had somehow led her to Southeast Asia. Josh's reaction was nothing short of explosive. The man who had been calm, reserved, and unemotional for years completely lost it. He broke down in front of me, sobbing like a child, shaking with relief and guilt. His first love, the woman he had mourned for 7 years, had returned. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream in anger or let him see how much it hurt. I knew what was coming next. The moment Brooklyn returned, everything changed. He told me he was divorcing me. His words were cold, detached, as if I was nothing to him. He said he didn't want to be tied to me anymore, that he had been a fool all these years. He wanted to give Brooklyn the life she deserved. He wanted to give her a proper place. It was like a punch to my gut, but I didn't cry. I signed the divorce papers with steady hands and walked away with the money, knowing it was the best thing I could do for myself. But the universe, it seemed, had different plans for me. The pain in my stomach began shortly after Josh left that morning. It was sharp, intense, and unbearable. My body betrayed me at that moment. I collapsed to the floor, unable to stand, and felt the world blur around me. "Josh, my stomach hurts. Please, call an ambulance," I gasped, barely able to speak. But Josh, who had been so ready to give up on me, looked down at me with nothing but indifference in his eyes. It wasn't even a glance of concern or pity. His words were colder than I ever imagined. "Whether you live or die, it's nothing to me," he said, walking out of the door without a second glance. The pain was unbearable. I couldn't understand how a man who had once promised to stand by me could be so cruel, so heartless. I tried to hold on to consciousness, to fight through the waves of pain, but I felt my strength fading. And just as my vision began to fade to white, I heard the faint sound of footsteps. I looked up, and there he was, Josh Martin. He had returned, but it wasn't for me. He wasn't there to help. No, he was only there to grab my phone and throw it at me, as if it was a chore he couldn't be bothered with. "If you want an ambulance, call it yourself. I have work to do," he spat before walking out of the room, leaving me to suffer alone. I don't know how long I lay there alone, in so much pain. It felt like hours, but finally, I mustered enough strength to reach for my phone and dial an emergency number. The ambulance came, and they took me to the hospital. But even as the doctors rushed to stabilize me, one question plagued my mind. Why was I still here? Why was I still fighting for someone who didn't even care enough to call an ambulance for me? When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The faint smell of antiseptic filled the air, and I was hooked up to N4. My body ached, but it wasn't the physical pain that hurt the most. It was the emptiness, the betrayal. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, Josh Martin, sitting by the window, working on his laptop, just as distant as ever. His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a moment, a fleeting second. He seemed surprised that I was awake. "You're awake?" he asked, his voice flat. I nodded silently, not knowing how to react. He seemed awkward, like he didn't know what to say. After a long pause, he added, "I came home to get my car keys, and I found you collapsed on the floor. The doctor is running tests. The results should be in this afternoon. Let's wait for that." And just like that, we fell into silence again. He went back to his work, and I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gotten this far. How had I become a woman who couldn't even get a basic level of compassion from her husband? The silence stretched between us, the air thick with the years of unresolved tension. But it was a different kind of silence now. There was no anger, no yelling, no arguing, just quiet. That was the calm before the storm, because the storm was coming, and it would change everything. The days passed in a blur. I couldn't focus. The pain in my stomach had dulled, but something far worse weighed heavily on my chest. I tried to bury my emotions in the bustle of the hospital room, the sterile walls that felt more like a cage than a place of healing. But it wasn't the physical pain that gnawed at me, it was the realization that I was nothing to Josh Martin. Not anymore. The next morning, the doctor came in with a serious look on his face. He explained that my condition wasn't as simple as I had hoped. The recurring stomach pains and the constant nausea were symptoms of something far more sinister. I didn't hear much after that. The word tumor echoed in my head, drowning out everything else. The doctor told me to stay calm, that there would be more tests, and that they could start treatment right away. But I couldn't think straight. My mind kept drifting back to Josh, his indifference, his cruelty, his ability to just leave me to suffer without even a second thought. After the doctor left, I stared at the 4 drip in my arm, trying to make sense of everything. I had never felt so alone. And yet, there he was, Josh, sitting in the same spot by the window, not a care in the world, typing away on his laptop like my life didn't matter to him. "Josh?" I called out softly, my voice weak. He didn't answer at first, but after a beat, he looked up. His expression softened slightly, but it was more out of habit than genuine concern. I couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness at how easy it was for him to act like nothing was wrong. "Yeah," he responded, his voice flat, distant. "I'm sick," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I might have cancer." His eyes flickered, a brief flash of something concern, regret, but then it was gone, replaced by the familiar coldness. "That's unfortunate," he said, his tone void of emotion. "I guess we'll see what the tests say." I could hardly breathe. It was like I had just poured my heart out to him, and he had slapped it away with nothing but indifference. I wanted to scream, to demand that he show some sign of humanity, but all I could do was stare at him, waiting for something, anything, to change. But nothing did. He returned to his work. I closed my eyes and turned away, feeling the sting of his abandonment deep in my chest. The man who had promised me everything, the man I had sacrificed so much for, was now nothing but a shadow in my life. His first love, Brooklyn, was alive, and I was nothing but a second choice. That evening, after Josh left for the night, I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights, my heart heavy. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep living in this emotional prison, hoping that someday, things would get better. There was no hope. Not with Josh, not with the way he treated me. But then something shifted in me. I had no family left, no one to turn to. My parents were gone, and the Martin family had shown me nothing but disdain. But I had something they didn't realize. I had myself, and that was more than enough. I wasn't going to lie down and accept the scraps he threw my way. I was going to fight. But what could I do? What could a woman like me, broken and sick, possibly do to get justice? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, the doctor came into my hospital room. The usual scent of antiseptic filled the air as he flipped through my file, the results already in his hands. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to brace myself for what he would say. I had already gotten the feeling it wasn't going to be good. "Miss Stone," he began, his voice kind yet clinical, "the test results have confirmed what we suspected. You have a malignant tumor in your stomach. It's aggressive. But the good news is, we've caught it early enough that treatment could be effective." It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt lightheaded, as though the ground had been pulled out from under me. Cancer. That word echoed in my head, making everything around me seem distant, blurry. I stared at the doctor, struggling to understand what he had just told me. I didn't hear the rest of what he said. My mind was too full of the word malignant to process anything else. He continued talking, but I barely registered it. He told me about chemotherapy options, about possible side effects, but none of it mattered in that moment. All I could think about was how unfair it all was. The man I had married, the man who was supposed to stand by me, had abandoned me. And now, I was facing a deadly illness all alone. The doctor left me alone in the room, but I remained frozen on the bed. My chest tightened, and my stomach churned, not just from the cancer, but from the overwhelming realization of what I had become. I was married to a man who didn't love me, a man who never loved me. I had spent years trying to win his affection, trying to make him see me as more than a business deal. And now, even when I was at my lowest, he couldn't be bothered to show any care for me. The thought of him made my blood boil. Josh Martin. His face flashed in my mind, his cold eyes, his indifferent voice when he told me that whether I lived or died was none of his concern. He had walked out of this hospital room like it was just another day. He had abandoned me, leaving me to suffer alone. That moment hit me hard. My whole life had been a series of compromises, of silently enduring pain for the sake of peace. I had accepted the role of the wife in a marriage that was a business transaction, not love. But not anymore. Not after everything he had done to me. Something inside me clicked. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the inevitable. I couldn't just let him get away with it. I had spent too many years letting Josh and his family control my life. But now, everything had changed. I was no longer going to be the weak woman who had to beg for affection. If Josh didn't care about me, then fine. But I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and scrolled through my contacts. I had one number in mind. Karen. I whispered as the phone rang. I need you. The line connected, and Karen's voice came through, steady and calm as always. Malini, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice laced with concern. I didn't have the strength to explain everything. I just blurted it out. Cancer. They've confirmed it. But Karen, I can't keep living this way. I need to do something about Josh. I need to take control back. He's destroyed everything. I'm not going to sit here and let him get away with it. There was a long pause on the other end. Malini, slow down. What exactly are you asking me to do? Karen asked carefully. I want to fight back. I want to take everything from him. The marriage, the money, everything he owes me. I want him to regret ever treating me this way. Karen was silent for a moment. I knew she was processing everything, but when she finally spoke again, her tone was firm and determined. All right, Malini, I'll help you. You don't need to suffer alone in silence. We're going to make sure Josh Martin knows exactly what it feels like to lose everything. You're going to take control of this situation, not just for the divorce, but for everything. We're going to make sure he never forgets how he treated you. I felt a surge of strength at her words. For the first time in months, I felt something besides hopelessness. I felt the spark of revenge. I want a divorce, but I want more than that, I said, my voice resolute. I want to expose him for everything he is. The cheating, the lies, everything. Karen's voice softened. It's going to be a long road, Malini, but I'll stand by you. We'll get the evidence we need. We'll go after his assets, his reputation, everything. You've been through too much. You deserve to take control of your life again. I closed my eyes, imagining Josh's face when he realized what I was going to do. He thought he could get away with walking out of my life without consequence, but he was wrong. I won't stop until he pays for what he's done to me, I whispered, more to myself than to Karen. I'll start gathering everything we need. You don't need to worry about a thing, Karen assured me. This is just the beginning, Malini. We're going to turn this around. I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of determination settling in my chest. I was no longer the woman who had begged for Josh's love. I was no longer the woman who had let him tear her apart. I was going to make him regret the day he ever crossed me. But I had to be careful. I couldn't let Josh see what I was planning. I had to bide my time, gather the right evidence, and strike when the moment was right. And it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about making sure he knew the full weight of the damage he had done. The hours that followed were a blur. I spent my time planning, writing down everything I could remember about Josh's actions over the years. The lies, the manipulations, the business deals that had been conducted with a complete disregard for me. I needed to have it all in order before I went public. But one thing was certain. Josh was going to pay, and no one, least of all him, was going to stop me from getting my justice. The next few weeks were a blur. Every day seemed to stretch endlessly before me, each moment filled with an insidious mix of anger and determination. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to sit around and allow Josh to walk all over me just because I was sick. The cancer diagnosis hung over me like a dark cloud, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it became the fuel I needed. If I had only a limited amount of time left, then I would make every moment count. I wasn't going to go down quietly. I would leave a mark on this world, on Josh's world, that he would never forget. Karen was my lifeline. She worked tirelessly, helping me gather evidence, tracing Josh's financials, pulling up records of every shady business deal, every unexplained transfer of money. But what we were building was much more than just a divorce case. It was a blueprint for revenge, a calculated strategy to make Josh pay for every lie, every cruelty he'd inflicted on me. Meanwhile, Josh had no idea what I was doing. He was too caught up in his reunion with Brooklyn. It was laughable how quickly he had moved on, how easily he had forgotten the woman who had been by his side for 7 years. The thing about Josh was that he had always been so sure of himself. His arrogance and self-righteousness were his armor, and he wore it like a second skin. He thought that once Brooklyn was back, everything would magically fall into place. He would get to have the perfect life with the perfect woman by his side. But he had forgotten one thing. I was no longer a passive participant in his game. I had begun to change. I had started taking control of my life in ways I never had before. I wasn't the timid, apologetic wife anymore. I was a woman who had been wronged, a woman who had been betrayed by the person she loved most. And now I had a mission: to get everything I deserved, to make Josh see that I wasn't someone to be discarded. I spent my days working with Karen, making phone calls, organizing documents, and preparing for what would be the most dangerous battle of my life. Every move I made was deliberate, calculated. I knew that once I started this, there would be no going back. There would be no second chances. It would either work, or it would destroy me. At night, when I was alone in the quiet of my apartment, I would sit and reflect on everything that had led me to this point. I thought about Josh, about how he had promised me the world and then thrown it all away. I thought about Brooklyn, how she had played the role of the victim so well, only to return from the dead and ruin everything I had left. I thought about the life I had once dreamed of, the life I thought I could have with Josh. But now that dream was nothing but ashes. And yet, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw something new, something stronger. I wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for myself, for my dignity, for the life I deserved. And I knew, deep down, that I had the power to make it all happen. Josh had underestimated me. He thought I would fade into the background and disappear. But I was about to prove him wrong in the most dramatic way possible. The first step in my plan was to make sure that Josh's perfect little world with Brooklyn would come crashing down. I had something he didn't know about: a secret weapon. I had the footage. It had been the hardest thing for me to gather, but I had done it. I had tracked down one of Josh's most trusted employees, someone who had seen firsthand the shady dealings Josh had been involved in. The man had taken a risk, but in the end, he had handed me everything I needed. Video footage of Josh and Brooklyn caught in the act of a business deal gone wrong. A deal that could potentially ruin his reputation, ruin everything he had built. The footage was perfect. It showed Josh at his most vulnerable, making shady promises to a client, engaging in business practices that went against every moral fiber he had ever claimed to stand for. It was the kind of evidence that would destroy a man's career and Josh's ego. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he found out what I had. As the days passed, I started to build the public narrative. I hired a public relations specialist who could help me craft the story I wanted to tell. Karen and I worked with the media to make sure that the moment Josh was served with the divorce papers, the world would know everything about his betrayal. I wanted to make sure Josh had nowhere to hide. I wanted him to feel the full weight of what he had done to me, and I wanted Brooklyn to see it all. The tension was building. Josh had no idea what was coming. He was busy basking in his reunion with Brooklyn, acting like everything was going to be perfect now that she was back. But the more I watched them, the more I realized how little I cared. I wasn't doing this for revenge against Brooklyn. She was just a pawn in Josh's game, a woman who had played him, just like he had played me. No, my focus was entirely on Josh. It was always about Josh. The day I finally served Josh the divorce papers was the day everything changed. Karen and I had orchestrated the entire thing. We made sure that the media was there to capture every moment, to document the moment when Josh realized his perfect life was about to crumble. I stood at the front door of the mansion, the divorce papers clutched tightly in my hand. I could hear the sound of laughter from inside, the clinking of glasses, as Josh and Brooklyn celebrated their reunion. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what I had planned. I rang the doorbell, and within seconds, Josh opened the door. His face was a mixture of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "I came to give you something," I said, holding up the divorce papers. He looked at them, his eyes narrowing. "Is this your idea of a joke?" he spat, his voice rising with anger. "No joke," I replied calmly. "This is your reality now." Before he could react, the camera crews, who had been waiting outside, rushed forward, capturing every moment. Josh's face turned pale as he realized what was happening. He looked at Brooklyn, who stood beside him, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You're making a mistake," Josh said, his voice trembling. "This isn't what you think." "Oh, I think it's exactly what I think," I replied, my voice steady and strong. "You don't get to walk away from me. Not this time." I turned and walked away, knowing that this was only the beginning. The storm had just begun, and I was going to make sure it destroyed everything Josh had built. But as I stepped into the car and drove away, a small smile tugged at my lips. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. This was my time, and I was just getting started. The media buzzed for days. News outlets, social media platforms, and gossip blogs were all over the story of the divorce scandal involving Josh Martin and his wife, Malini Stone. The narrative was simple yet effective, a seemingly perfect marriage torn apart by betrayal, lies, and a wife who had finally taken back her power. The footage of the moment I served Josh the divorce papers went viral. I watched as the cameras captured his shock, his anger, and the absolute panic in his eyes when he realized that his carefully curated life was starting to crumble. It felt surreal. For years, I had been silenced, ignored, disrespected, and humiliated. But now, I was in control. The power had shifted. Josh Martin, the successful businessman, the man who had everything, was now at the mercy of the truth. But as much as I savored that moment, I knew it wasn't over. I wasn't just after revenge anymore. I was after justice. I wanted Josh to face the consequences of what he had done. I wanted the world to see the real him. The man who had manipulated me, used me, and discarded me like I was nothing. It wasn't long before the phone calls started. Josh's lawyer reached out first. He was concerned. They were aware of the media storm, and they were already trying to figure out how to handle the damage control. They wanted to negotiate a settlement. They thought that if they offered me enough money, I would back down. But that was the last thing I wanted. "Tell Josh I'm not interested in his money," I told the lawyer bluntly. "What I want is for him to pay for what he's done. I want everything, not just his assets, but his reputation. He is going to answer for every lie he has told and every person he has hurt." The lawyer didn't have much to say after that. I could tell he was caught off guard by my resolve. He had probably expected me to buckle under pressure, to accept a financial payout and quietly walk away. But I wasn't the same woman who had silently tolerated Josh's indifference for so long. I wasn't going to let him think he could buy me off. Not this time. Meanwhile, Karen and I continued to build our case. We knew Josh would fight back, and we were ready for it. We were gathering evidence that went beyond the surface: text messages, financial documents, and witness statements from people who had worked with him and seen the kind of man he truly was. The more I learned about him, the more disgusted I became. Josh had always been a man who manipulated everyone around him, using them for his gain. But now, he was the one who would be manipulated. The roles had reversed. One afternoon, I received a call from one of Josh's former colleagues, a woman named Rebecca who had worked with him for years. She had been part of some of the shady business deals Josh had orchestrated in the past. "Malini, I need to talk to you," Rebecca said, her voice shaky. "I've been following the news, and I know what Josh did to you. I can't stay silent anymore. There's so much I know about him, things that you need to know. I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe, and when I saw her, I could tell she was nervous. She kept glancing around, as though afraid someone might see her. Sit down, Rebecca. What's going on? I asked, my voice steady. I could see the fear in her eyes, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Josh has been involved in so many illegal things over the years. The business deals he's been part of, the backdoor dealings with competitors. It's all corrupt. But the worst part, he's been using his position to control people, to intimidate them into doing what he wants. Rebecca leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know things that could ruin him. I can give you the evidence. I just need to know that you're ready to expose him. I sat back in my chair, processing everything she was telling me. Rebecca had seen the worst of Josh, the side of him that he had kept hidden from the world. This was the kind of evidence that would take down his empire. Give me everything, I said, my voice low and determined. I'll make sure the world knows exactly who Josh Martin really is. And so, it began. The final phase of my plan. We had the evidence, we had the witnesses, and now we had the world's attention. All we needed was to make our move. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Karen and I worked around the clock, organizing the documents, coordinating with reporters, and setting up meetings with the lawyers. We knew we had to be careful. One wrong move, and Josh would find a way to twist the situation in his favor. But every time I thought about how Josh had treated me, how he had abandoned me when I needed him most, my resolve hardened. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing this for all the women who had been hurt by men like Josh, men who thought they could get away with everything because of their wealth and power. The morning of the big reveal arrived. The press conference was set, and I was ready. I stood in front of the camera, holding a folder filled with evidence that would bring Josh's world crashing down. My heart raced, but I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing, their pens ready to write. As I stepped up to the podium, I looked around at the faces in the crowd. Some were familiar, some were strangers, but I didn't care. Today, I was going to tell my story, the real story. I'm here today to expose the truth, I began, my voice steady. For years, Josh Martin has lived a lie. He's built his empire on manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. He's hurt countless people, and now it's time for him to face the consequences. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. Josh Martin is a fraud, I continued, and I'm not the only one he's hurt. I've spent the last few weeks gathering evidence that will show the world who he really is. Today, I am going to make sure he can't hide behind his wealth or his reputation any longer. The reporters in the room began to murmur, and I knew I had their attention. And just as I was about to reveal the first piece of evidence, I heard a voice from the back of the room. Malini, you can't do this. It was Josh's voice. I turned around to see him standing in the doorway, his face a mask of rage. I'm not going to let you ruin me, he shouted, his voice shaking with fury. But it was too late. The storm had already begun. Josh stormed into the room, his face contorted with panic. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by a man unraveling at the seams. The reporters turned their cameras on him immediately, flashes erupting like lightning as his every move was captured. Malini, he barked, striding toward the podium. Stop this nonsense. You don't know what you're doing. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, clutching the folder tighter against my chest. The whole room was watching, and I wasn't about to be intimidated, not by him, not anymore. No, Josh, I said calmly, loud enough for the mix to catch. You don't know what I'm doing. He reached the podium, trying to grab the folder from me, but I stepped back and held it out of reach. This is over, he hissed under his breath. You don't want to go down this road. I smiled slightly, keeping my voice steady for the room. You've already dragged me through hell, Josh. This road? This is my way out. Gasps rippled through the audience, and the reporters sprang into action, capturing every word. Josh's eyes darted around the room, suddenly aware that the cameras were no longer his allies, they were witnesses. He straightened his back, trying to regain control. This woman is bitter because of our divorce, he announced to the room. She's trying to damage my reputation with fabricated claims. This is nothing but slander. Slander? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Let's see if the documentation agrees. Karen stood up from the front row and walked over to me with a USB drive. She handed it to the technician running the media screen. Moments later, the first video clip played. Josh's voice filled the room. No paper trail. Keep the money offshore. If this deal leaks, we both go down, he said in the clip, sitting at a dimly lit restaurant table, across from a known real estate mogul with a history of financial misconduct. The room went silent. Reporters began typing furiously, some already speaking into live feeds. Josh's face turned pale, then red. He turned to me, his voice shaking now not with anger, but with fear. Where did you get this? He growled. It doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that it's real. And this is just the beginning. Another clip began to play. This one showed Josh and Brooklyn James, his beloved first love, discussing how to publicly spin the story of our divorce. In it, she suggests leaking fake photos of me with another man to turn public opinion in their favor. Are you sure this won't backfire? Josh asks on the tape. Don't worry. Brooklyn purrs. She's sick and weak. No one will believe her side. The audience gasped again. Some of the reporters looked genuinely stunned. Josh turned toward the door, clearly ready to flee. But it was too late. The room exploded with noise, reporters shouting questions, camera flashes blinding him. Karen stood beside me like a silent fortress, handing over printed documents to a few trusted journalists. I stepped away from the podium, letting the evidence speak for itself. The sound of Josh's empire collapsing was deafening. He rushed toward me, his voice low and ragged. You'll regret this, Malini. I looked him in the eye, really looked. This was the man I had once loved, the man I had tried so desperately to save. But all I saw now was a stranger, a coward. No, Josh, I said with finality. You will. He stormed out of the room, leaving behind a storm of flashbulbs and scandal. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt my knees weaken. Karen was there in a heartbeat, steadying me. You okay? She whispered. I nodded. I'm tired, but I'm finally free. That night, the news spread like wildfire. Every major outlet had picked up the story. Hashtags about Josh Martin trended globally. Videos of his outburst, the incriminating clips, and my calm takedown were all over social media. And for once, people weren't criticizing me. They were supporting me. She's so composed. Can't believe what she went through. She's the definition of strength. I cried that night not because I was broken, but because for the first time in years, I felt seen. But the fallout had just begun. Within 48 hours, investors began pulling out of Josh's company. His legal team resigned. Even his parents released a statement condemning his behavior and distancing themselves from him. Brooklyn James, the woman who had faked her death, was nowhere to be found. She deleted her social media and reportedly left the country again. I should have felt triumphant, and in some ways I did. But I also felt an unexpected emptiness. I'd spent so long focused on revenge and justice, I hadn't thought about what came after. That question was answered when I returned home a week later. As I stepped out of my car, I found Josh sitting on the front steps of the house we used to share. He looked nothing like the man I had known, disheveled, thinner, broken. I walked past him without saying a word, but he stood up and blocked my path. Please, he said, his voice cracking. Just give me 5 minutes. I stared at him. What could you possibly have to say that I haven't already heard? I know I can't undo what I did, he began. I know I failed you. I failed myself. Everything. It's all gone. Brooklyn, the business, my name, everything I once valued. You valued lies, I interrupted coldly. You chose to believe a woman who faked her death over your own wife. I was blind, he whispered. I let grief and guilt consume me. And when she came back, I thought I was getting a second chance. But it was all a lie. You were the one who was real, the one who stayed. The wind blew gently between us, silent witnesses to a broken man's confession. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, stepping aside. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. Everything you were, everything I destroyed. I gave him one long, final look. There were no more words needed. I stepped inside and shut the door. Behind me, I heard his footsteps fade away, and I knew this chapter of my life was truly over. The morning after Josh left my doorstep, I sat at the kitchen table with a warm cup of tea in my hands, staring out the window. The city buzzed with life beyond the glass, but I felt like I was in a world of my own, peaceful, still, and for the first time in a long, long time free. I wasn't the same woman who walked into that marriage 7 years ago. That girl was wide-eyed, hopeful, and so desperate to be loved that she gave all of herself to a man who didn't deserve even a piece of her heart. I had spent so many years bending, shrinking, breaking for Josh Martin, years of trying to earn his love, trying to heal a wound in him that wasn't mine to fix. I let his grief become my prison, let his pain drown out my own. I gave until there was nothing left of me. But something extraordinary happened in the midst of all that pain. I found myself. The cancer hadn't killed me, the betrayal hadn't broken me, and now I was standing on the edge of something entirely new, not just survival, rebirth. I sold the house, the one we had shared, the one filled with memories I didn't need anymore. Every room echoed with ghosts I no longer feared. I left it all behind, like a snake shedding old skin, stepping into the light. I moved to the coast, a place where the air was clean and the sea stretched endlessly into the horizon. A place that felt nothing like the city where my old self had crumbled. There, I bought a quiet villa with a small garden and a glass-walled library I built myself. I opened a cafe and bookstore where people could come, read, relax, and feel safe, just like I finally did. I named it Second Life, and that's exactly what it became. Word spread quickly. Young creatives, students, locals, they flocked to my cafe. Some came for the coffee, others came to read, a few came to talk. They didn't know my past, and I didn't offer it. But when they sat across from me and opened up about their heartbreaks, their disappointments, their fears, I listened, because I understood. In helping others heal, I kept healing too. Day by day, my strength returned. My body responded well to treatment. The doctors told me I was doing better than expected. My hair started growing back, my skin regained its glow, and I smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in what felt like years. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection and barely recognize the woman in the mirror. She looked confident, wise, unbothered. There were still scars, emotional and physical, but they no longer defined me. They were just proof that I had survived. Then one day, he showed up, not Josh. His name was Adrian, and he was nothing like the man I had once loved. He was quiet but steady, a man whose presence was calming, not suffocating. He was an officer stationed nearby, and he had walked into my cafe one rainy afternoon, looking for coffee and a dry place to sit. We started with small talk, then jokes, then stories. He didn't ask about my past. He simply met me where I was, never prying, never judging. And over time, I realized something. I was laughing again. We went on walks along the beach. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, we just listened to the sound of the waves. Other times, we spoke for hours. I told him about my dream to expand the cafe, to create a space for women rebuilding their lives. He listened like it mattered, and then he offered to help. It was strange. After everything I'd been through, part of me was still afraid. Afraid to trust, to love, to open my heart again. But Adrian never rushed me. He moved at my pace, never asking for more than I was willing to give. One evening, under a fading orange sky, he reached for my hand and said, "You don't have to be ready. Just don't be afraid to be happy again." I didn't cry. I smiled, because I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Some months later, we got engaged. It wasn't a grand gesture, no diamonds and champagne glasses, no elaborate public scene. It happened on a quiet morning when we were making breakfast together. He passed me a ring box across the counter, simple and elegant. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not because I want to fix you, but because I want to honor the woman you've become." I said yes, not out of desperation, not out of fear of being alone. I said yes, because I chose him, the same way I finally chose myself. But life has a strange sense of irony. 3 weeks before the wedding, I returned to my hometown to visit my parents' graves. I stood in front of their tombstones, tears in my eyes, telling them everything. About how far I had come, about how I had finally learned to love myself, about the new life I was about to begin. And as I was walking back to my hotel, it happened. Josh Martin appeared. He was standing in the parking lot, older, thinner, paler. He didn't approach immediately, just stood there, watching me. When our eyes met, he took a step forward. "Malini," he said, barely above a whisper. I felt a strange stillness wash over me. Not fear, not pain, just stillness. "Josh," I said, my voice calm. He looked at my hand at the engagement ring and smiled weakly. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied. I'm getting married too, he added quickly, as if he needed me to know. I nodded. Then congratulations to you too. He looked like he wanted to say more, but there was nothing left to say. The silence between us said everything. All the anger, all the grief, all the love and loss. It was over. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, I hope you're happy. I met his eyes, and for the first time in 7 years, I meant it when I said, I am, and I walked away. As I walked away from Josh Martin, I felt nothing. No bitterness, no resentment, no anger, just peace. That single encounter was the final piece I didn't know I needed to close the chapter. The man who once haunted my dreams, who shattered my self-worth, now stood as nothing more than a memory. A faded scar, no longer capable of bleeding. I returned to my coastal town the next day, where the air smelled of salt and jasmine, and life hummed gently around me. Adrian greeted me at the train station, his hand wrapping around mine as naturally as breathing. You okay? He asked, reading my silence like a book. I nodded. I saw him. His brows lifted slightly, and it didn't hurt. He pulled me into his arms right there, in front of everyone, and whispered against my hair, because you've already healed. And it was true. The days leading up to our wedding were filled with quiet joy, not the frantic chaos I'd seen in other people's weddings. No Bridezilla moments, no last-minute panics, just serenity and the warm knowledge that I was walking into a union built on mutual respect and love, not convenience, not pressure. I invited only a handful of people, friends who had stood by me, the team from Second Life, and a few locals who had become like family. The ceremony was simple, held on the shore just before sunset. Adrian wore his formal dress uniform. I wore a flowing white gown with no veil. I didn't want to be hidden anymore. As I walked down the sandy aisle barefoot, the wind gently tugging at my dress, I looked at Adrian waiting for me under a driftwood arch adorned with lavender and eucalyptus. His eyes never left mine, and I knew in that moment that every pain I'd endured had led me to this exact place. I had once begged for crumbs of affection. Now I was being offered the whole table. After we said our vows we wrote ourselves, there was a quiet moment where Adrian reached into his jacket and handed me a small red envelope. Confused, I opened it. Inside was a single note: for the rest of your life, I hope you'll be happy and well, unsigned. I stared at the handwriting, instantly recognizing it. Josh. He hadn't come to the wedding, but this was his way of saying goodbye. I didn't know how he'd found out when or where the ceremony was. Maybe someone told him. Maybe he'd been watching from afar. I didn't care. I folded the note neatly, handed it to Adrian, and said, please throw it away. He nodded, but I stopped him as he turned. Wait. I removed the cash inside the envelope and tucked it into a charity donation box we had set up at the wedding to support women escaping abusive relationships. I smiled to myself. That was the last piece of Josh Martin that would ever touch my life. Later that night, under the stars, with candles flickering and music playing softly, Adrian and I shared our first dance. My head on his chest, his arms strong around me, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to truly believe that this happiness was mine, that I deserved it. We spent our honeymoon traveling slowly through small towns in Europe, no glamorous resorts or five-star hotels, just quiet places with rich history, cobbled streets, and people who didn't know our pasts. In one such village in Italy, we stumbled across an old bookstore that reminded me of home. We spent hours inside. Adrian sat in a corner with a novel, and I browsed for old poetry. There, I found a worn copy of Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. I opened it and found a highlighted line. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. I wept. Because it was true. All the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it wasn't final. It was just one part of a journey that had brought me here. And beauty had followed, blooming from the ruin. When we returned home weeks later, the shop had become even more successful. A small team had kept it running, and they'd added a new corner, the healing shelf, filled with stories of survivors and second chances. Customers donated books. Some left notes between the pages. It became more than a shop. It became a sanctuary. And I finally lived. No longer a woman defined by her past. No longer a wife, an accessory, or a liability. I was Malini Stone cancer survivor, business owner, wife, and woman reborn. And then came a surprise I hadn't expected. One quiet afternoon, I sat in the back garden, barefoot in the grass reading, when Adrian came up behind me and knelt. His hands trembled slightly. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure," he said, placing a small sonogram photo in my lap. I stared at it, blinking in disbelief. "We're," I gasped. He nodded, smiling through tears. "You're going to be a mom, Malini?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. All those years of being told I was barren, that I was the reason we couldn't conceive, all the guilt I had carried, the shame others had heaped onto me, it crumbled. I held the image to my heart, sobbing and laughing all at once. This child, this life, this future, it was mine. And Josh Martin faded from the headlines. The companies he tried to rebuild never reached the same heights. His scandals quietly haunted him. Occasionally, I'd hear rumors that he moved overseas, that he tried to remarry, that he drank too much and talked to himself in cafes. But I never reached out, and he never tried again. He became just another chapter in a book I had long since closed. Years passed gently, quietly, like waves lapping against the shore. Life no longer rushed at me in overwhelming tides. Instead, it unfolded like the pages of a book I was finally writing myself. Our child, a boy with my eyes and Adrian's dimples, became the sun around which our small world orbited. We named him Rami, which means loving and protector. I wanted his name to carry everything I had once needed and everything he would never lack. Motherhood came to me like rain after a drought. I wasn't perfect. There were days when I felt exhausted, uncertain, or terrified that I would somehow pass on my pain. But each time Rami reached for me, called me mama, or fell asleep on my chest, I knew I was more than enough. Adrian was the father I'd never known existed in this world, gentle, patient, present. He would sing lullabies off key while feeding Rami, carry him around in a sling while working in the garden, and wake up in the middle of the night just to check if he was breathing. We were happy, not in the loud, dramatic way that begged for attention, but in the deep, steady, unshakable way that nourishes the soul. The bookstore expanded. Second Life became more than a name. It became a symbol. Survivors from all over the country began visiting. Some came to read, some came to talk, some just sat in silence, sipping warm coffee and letting the air heal them. I hosted support circles for women abuse survivors, divorcees, widows, even teens struggling to understand their self-worth. I didn't preach. I simply told my story. I let my scars show, and in doing so, gave others permission to reveal theirs. One day, a teenage girl approached me after a session. Her hands trembled as she handed me a folded letter. I printed this from an old blog post," she stammered. "It's your story, right? About Josh Martin?" My heart stilled. "Yes," I said softly. "It is." She nodded quickly. "It saved me. I just wanted you to know that." Tears welled in my eyes as she hugged me tightly. That moment, that simple, wordless hug meant more than any courtroom victory or headline ever could. Because that was what it was all for. Not revenge, not even justice, but healing. Not just mine, but everyone's who saw themselves in my reflection. Josh Martin became a faded ghost in my life. Occasionally, someone would mention his name in passing. "Did you hear he tried starting another company? He's been in rehab again." Apparently, his third engagement ended in a scandal. I never responded. He was no longer a villain to me. He was just a man, flawed, broken, lost in his own story. I had stopped hating him. In truth, I had stopped feeling anything for him. And that was freedom. One spring evening, as cherry blossoms swirled outside the shop windows, I stood at the counter, watching Rami scribble on napkins with a purple crayon. Adrian walked in with takeout and kissed me on the cheek. "You look like you're thinking too hard," he said with a smile. "Just remembering," I replied. He brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. "Leave the past where it belongs." I looked at our son, our life, the laughter bubbling from the cafe's tables, the cozy hush of pages turning and cups clinking. I said. That night, after Rami went to bed, I opened a new journal. On the first page I wrote, 7 years ago, I thought my life had ended, but it was just beginning. Not all stories are about finding love. Some are about finding yourself. I closed the book and held it to my chest, and then I walked outside, barefoot on the dewy grass, looking up at the stars. They had always been there, distant, quiet, constant, even when I couldn't see them. I breathed in the night air, smiled and whispered, "Thank you for the pain, for the lessons, for the chance to begin again. Because this was not just my story. It was a reminder to every woman who has ever been broken, discarded, or silenced. You are not your suffering. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become next. And I chose freedom.